friends, I welcome you all on this prestigious online platform of TRIST-IIS. This session is dedicated for this year's UPSC mains questions, and I, Saurabh Chaturvedi, is going to provide you the explanation to the questions related to governance and internal security. As we all know that governance is the part of Indian polity paper, that is the GS2 paper, and internal security is the part of GS3. But there are certain portions of governance which are related to civil services values, civil services ethics, civil services structure, process, behavior, which are the part of paper 4, that is ethics also. So the questions of governance are incorporated with paper 2 and paper 4 both. Fortunately, in this year's paper, what we have seen that there is a lot of intermingling in the questions of polity and governance. And as you all know, that the question number 2, that is related to the change in the RTI, is important from the perspective of ethics. Far as governance is concerned, then there are 2 dedicated questions from the segment of governance, if I'll say. One is related to the civil services, and that is democracy and bureaucracy is there in your syllabus from where that question comes. And another question is related to the e-governance. So one by one, first we'll try and explain to you the questions related to governance, and then we will move ahead with the topic of internal security. So in governance, the first question is question number 7 in GS2. And this question, as it says, that institutional quality is a crucial driver of economic performance. In this context, suggest civil services reforms for strengthening the democracy. So as I always say that you need to go through the question twice or thrice to understand the basic demand of the question. Here, they say that institutional quality is essential for economic performance. And in today's time, we need every organization to perform well. Here, don't take the word economic in literal sense. Here, economic performance means that the organization is performing to its utmost level. The organization is performing to its best. The organization is ensuring the value of 3E, that is economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So when we discuss about these 3 variables, then economic performance basically suggests the quality of work by the particular institution. So what they are trying to say that institutional quality is the driver of economic performance. So we need to bring quality in civil services of India with various reforms so that they will become the flag bearer of good performance, or they will ensure the good governance, or they will ensure the achhe din for us. So as the question suggests, this question is of 10 marks and the word limit is 150 words. So the formatting of question will go in the manner that in the beginning you will express that what this economic performance is all about. In the introduction, you will explain the question with the term called economic performance. Then you will explain that how this institutional quality can be ensured. And to bring this institutional quality in civil services, what civil services reforms are needed. So these 2 parts can be explained in 30 or 40 words, and this civil services reform section must go for at least 80 plus words to make the answer relevant as per the demand of the question. So in the beginning, what you can say that quality of any organization is based upon certain objectives, structure, procedure, and behavior related to the organization. If we try and ensure the positivity in the objective structure, process and behavior, then organization is going to be the ideal organization and will ensure the economy, efficiency and the effectiveness. Far as civil services is concerned, in civil services we have certain problems that are in the way of civil services institutional quality. And then in the second part, you will go with the problems of civil services. So once you will explain the problems, then only you will be able to suggest the reforms. And you must remember that these civil services reforms are intended to make democracy strength. That is, the reforms to the civil services must make our democracy strong. This is the kind of suggestion they are asking for. So when you go for the problems of civil services, then you will suggest that in Indian civil services, the biggest problem is the colonial mindset. And in this mindset, they believe in the elitist manner, elite manner. The third thing is related to the insensitivity of the civil servant. The fourth thing is related to the secrecy of the civil servant, which they still believe that they are working in the Official Secrecy Act. The next thing is related to the red tapeism, delay of work and the corruption involved in the civil services. The next thing is related to the nepotism in the civil services. The next thing, the next problem that we can suggest is related to the politicization of Indian civil services, the political influence or the political pressure over the Indian civil services. Apart from that, lack of modernization is another problem. The availability or the presence of administration is another thing. We have administrative vacuum at various places where administrative structure are not available. The quality of civil services is again a question, and what we have seen, right from recruitment to training to performance, we have seen that civil services are not performing at par or as per their ability. The training of the civil services is always under scrutiny. So all these are the troubles related to the civil services. And if you want to make civil services more civil services as a source of democratization, then you need to ensure that the objectives of the civil services, the structure of the civil services, the procedure of the civil services, and the behavior of the civil services must be reformed in a democratic manner. So far as the objective is concerned, there must be the clarity of objective, the participation in defining the objective. The grassroots level people or bureaucrats must be considered while defining the goals of the civil services. So participative decision making or participative policy making is the first thing which makes civil services not only democratic but strengthen the democratic process in India. Apart from that, decentralization and delegation are the essential ingredient along with democratization that will make the civil services clear with their objective and vision. Far as the structure is concerned, in our civil services we have the pyramidal structure, hierarchical structure that will create the distance between the superior and the subordinate, that will create the problem of red tapeism, that will create the problem of defining duties. So to eliminate this problem from the structure, we need democratization of the structure in the form of matrix organization, where we have equal pay for equal work and every individual and officer is respected as per his performance rather than his post. Apart from this structure, when we go for the procedural working, we need to make sure that we have to make the presence of civil services everywhere. Like the thinker called Feiner said that civil services is everywhere, it hardly leaves any gap. So 24/7, 365 civil services at your doorstep. They are sensitive towards your requirement. They are working for the deprived people. They are working in the remote areas through the process of e-governance. So when we ensure e-governance in the procedural form of the civil services, then civil services at your door and 24/7, 365 kind of things can be ensured. And this will democratize the working of civil services, in turn democratizing the whole setup of governance. But the major area of civil services reform lies in the behavior. And when we discuss about the behavior, then we need to make sure that our civil servant comes out of the colonial mindset or the mindset of the police state and work for the welfare state. Our civil servant should ensure that he will be sympathetic, or you can say empathetic, towards the demands of the people. It will ensure the responsiveness, that is, the demand of people will be fulfilled on the timely basis. Then in the civil services, we need to have proper accountability. In the civil services behavior, we need to have the proper transparency. In the civil services behavior, we need to have the inclusion. And when you ensure these behavioral changes in the civil services, then civil services will work for the welfare of the people, for the purpose of the good governance, or you can say for the achhe din, or sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas. So if you really want to make Indian governance system democratic, then the roadmap goes through the democratization of civil services, which can be ensured through its objective structure, process, and behavior. And in this way, civil services will become the bulwark of democracy in India. So this is how you can explain this question in 150 words. We can describe this question in another way also, where we can define that in civil services reform, we can have the different efforts made by the government, like the efforts towards the lateral entry, the efforts regarding recruitment reform, the efforts regarding the training reform, the efforts regarding the e-governance, or you can say modernization of civil services, the efforts regarding the retraining of civil servant, the efforts regarding the behavioral change in the civil servants. So efforts can also be included, but as the demand of the question is about the reforms, so you can mix the efforts of the government with your suggestions in this part of reform, because there is only 150 words to explain this question. So this is how you can explain this topic or this question that is from the topic called democracy and bureaucracy. So the second question from the governance is the question number 8. And this question number 8, as it suggests, it says that the emergence of fourth industrial revolution, that is the digital revolution, has initiated the e-governance as an integral part of government. So the question demands two things. One, it suggests that digital revolution, or what you can say ICT revolution, information and communication technology revolution, has opened the way for e-governance, and now e-governance is an integral part of Indian government. Again, it is a 10 marks question with 150 words limit. So the formatting will be, rather than explaining the digital revolution or the fourth industrial revolution, you will waste your words. You should directly go with the ingredients of digital revolution, that is, what is digital revolution? How digital revolution will help in e-governance? So e-governance and digital revolution, their connectivity, and how it becomes the part of government through various programs, central government programs and state government programs, and what can be the benefits that we can ensure through e-governance. If you include these 4 parts in your answer, then it will be the most compact, or you can say appropriate answer for this particular question. But again, the word limit is very important. You cannot waste words in this or this part. You need to focus on this particular part only, where e-governance is incorporating with the government. So in the beginning, what you will say, that in today's era of information and communication revolution, what we have seen, that human life is driven through technology only. And in this regard, this fourth industrial revolution or digital revolution is based upon 3 pillars, that is Digi Infra, Digi Connect, and Digi Literacy. In Digi Infra, we ensure the smart devices availability to everyone. In Digi Connect, we ensure the internet revolution, the data revolution to everyone. And in digi-literacy, we will ensure the awareness, or you can say the training of digital technology to the provider as well as the consumer. And in this regard, if we can ensure these three pillars of digital revolution, it will automatically ensure e-governance in the governmental working. Our government started Digital India project with these three pillars only to ensure the incorporation of e-governance in the governmental working. Now, if you want to connect e-governance with governmental working, then there are various interactive models where the government can connect to the various aspects of governance. There is G2G connect, there is G2B connect, there is G2E connect, and there is G2C connect. All these four kind of connects are important. G2G is government to government connectivity, where we see the national headquarters, the state headquarters, the district headquarters connecting to each other through NICNet network. There we ensure the decentralized planning. There we ensure the vigilance of the policies and programs. And this is how we ensure that e-governance will ensure intergovernmental communication and coordination to make good governance. Far as G2B is concerned, it is government to business. And when it is government to business, then government is trying to ensure ease of doing business, and so that we will have the healthy atmosphere for the corporate houses. And in this regard, the e-tendering process, the e-taxation process, the e-payment process, all these processes are very important. Far as G2E is concerned, then government is ensuring e-governance with their employees, government to employee. So e-salary, e-pension, e-vigilance are the aspects through which e-governance is incorporated in this aspect of government. And the last aspect of government is G2C, where government is ensuring services, community services and other services to their citizens. So government of citizen to citizen connectivity is very important, where the government can ensure the e-education, e-medicine, or you can say e-PDS scheme, or the other services, the passport services, the reservation services, the taxation services, the payment services, the direct benefit transfer schemes, all those things can be ensured through G2C connectivity. In the current time, government is directly involving in e-governance in these four modes. And apart from this, when we have to ensure C2C connect, where in the social media, we see the citizen to citizen connect, creating various cyber crimes, there the control of government becomes very important to control the hate speech, the fake news and the other things. Far as B2B connect is concerned, then government is again going to ensure that the corporate houses will not come ahead with monopoly, oligopoly kind of things, so, they will harm the interest of the consumer. And far as B2C connect is concerned, then in e-commerce procedure, the interest of the consumer must be upheld. We must ensure that e-frauds should be restricted. So in all these aspects of e-governance, the interaction between the government and the e-governance tools can be seen. The government of India or any government, when incorporate e-governance in the governmental setup, then they can have various models to ensure this. And the models that can be suggested to incorporate e-governance in the governmental setup is broadcasting model, is critical flow model, you can name them, or advocacy model. In broadcasting model, government try and ensure as much as information possible to the citizen, because they believe that an informed society is the empowered society. But the problem with this is that sometimes the citizen citizens start facing information overload, and the problem of filtering starts, where the citizen need to filter the information of their choice. So the second option is critical flow model. In the critical flow model, government provide the information to the citizen as per their need or requirement. So this will reduce the information overload, but this may create the problem where the government can control the information for their political agenda or for their ideology, and this is where the freedom of expression get compromised. And in the third model, which is the advocacy model, this is the most democratic model of e-governance, where the government provide the information to the citizen as per their demand. And the RTI is the biggest example of this, where the information is given to the citizen as the demand from the government. So this advocacy model of e-governance is more appropriate when we need to include e-governance in the governmental setup. And once we ensure this e-governance in the governmental setup, we can have various benefits like transparency, like accountability, like sensitivity, like inclusiveness, or you can say coordination, communication, timely working. All these are the benefits. But the more important benefits of e-governance are empowered citizen, global citizen working for global governance, the creation of the knowledge society, and all this is going to ensure the human resource development in the nation. The demographic dividend that we talk about can be ensured if we make sure that e-governance is incorporated in our governmental setup. The schemes of central government like Digital India scheme, like DigiLocker scheme, like Gram Portal scheme, or the BHIM app, or the various other projects and programs where the PDS system, the health system is provided through the smart cards. All these are the reflection of benefits of the e-governance. And far as state government is concerned, the Bhumi project of Karnataka, the Gyan Doot project of Madhya Pradesh, the Lokvani project of Uttar Pradesh, or the Friends project of Kerala, all these projects are very much useful in expressing the incorporation of e-governance in the governmental setup. And with the help of this, you can easily explain that yes, e-governance has become the integral part of our governmental setup or our government. And with this, we not only ensure the modernization of government, but we also ensure the delivery of government to the grassroots level. And this is how you can explain this question number 8. There can be, again, you can if you are having the word limit, you can either delete one of this from here, that is the connects that we have described, that you can explain in a restricted manner, or rather than these three models, you can go for this advocacy model to show the incorporation of e-governance. You can reduce the benefits to the words only, but if you can incorporate all these things in your answer, then it can be the most appropriate answer for the purpose of this particular question. So apart from these two questions, there are certain other questions which are directly or indirectly related to governance. One is related to this change in the RTI, that is the question number 2, I think. And in the question number 2, it is said that the recent amendment in the Right to Information Act will have profound impact on the autonomy and the independence of the Information Commission. So this is from the institutional setup also, where we discuss various commissions, committees, etc. But as this is the part of ethics, then it is going to be discussed by sir in polity section or in ethics section by Vikas sir himself. So I'm not getting into this particular aspect. And in your paper 4 also, when we seen, there are various questions related to civil services ethics and values. So those questions will also be explained by Vikas sir. So rather than going for other questions, I will explain only these two questions in the governance setup. And now we will move ahead with the topic of internal security. And this is the time where we have seen that almost 25% to 30% questions are coming from internal security. So the syllabus is less, but the output is very much. And that is why it is very important to give weightage to this portion of internal security. So in this year's question paper, the number of questions from internal security are around 4 to 5. But the standard of question is very simple, and basic questions are being asked in this year's paper. You can see that the question number 9 and 10 is directly related to internal security, and then you have question number 19 and 20. So these 4 questions I am going to explain one by one in this internal security segment. The 9th question is related to the cyber crime and the remedies. The question is very simple: discuss the different types of cyber crimes and measures required to fight this menace. So this is state services kind of question. But when you have simple question, then you need to write it in an exceptional manner. So when we are going to define this question number 9, then we need to make sure that in initial 15 word, we will try and explain the cyber crime and its reason. Then we will move ahead with the types of cyber crime, then the impacts of the cyber crime, and then the efforts and the suggestions that we can give to control this menace. In the beginning, you can say that any technology is value neutral, but when it gets associated with wrong human values, rather than blessing, it becomes a curse. Information and communication technology is no different. When it is going to work in positive sense, it is like from worm to tomb. But when it is going to curse us, then the various kind of cyber crimes emerges. The different type of cyber crimes can be expressed in two ways. One related to the individual and the society, and two which is related to the nation or international scenario. The individual threats can be related to the problem of hacking, the problem of cracking, the problem of spamming, the problem of spoofing, the problem of stalking. You can name all these problems one by one. There is the problem of data diddling, there is the problem of spamming, the problem of phishing, the problem of whaling, the problem of virus or the malware, that is malicious software. All these are the kind of cyber crimes. Apart from that, what we have seen in the recent time, that the volatile problem of pornography, the problem of hate speech, the problem of fake news is creating nuisance in the society. Apart from that, this technology is also creating psychological problems to the society and the individual. The lonely, crowded human being working with technology or surrounded with technology, this current human being is a matter of concern for us. But when these individual problems move ahead with the problem of national security, then the cyber crime becomes a biggest challenge for us. And here what we can see, that cyber terror is important. Cyber attack is one concern. Cyber war is another concern. Cyber vandalism is the concern, or cyber intelligence is the concern. So all these are the problems which are related to the national security, and that is why the remedy is essential. The ideology of terrorism, along with its funding, its recruitment, its planning, its execution, can be performed through ICT, and that is what we call cyber terror. Various kind of organized crime, whether it is human trafficking, drug trafficking, wildlife trafficking, or you can say fake currency inducement, the Bitcoin problem, all these problems, what we have seen, are creating the funds for the terror. Cyber attack is the attack on the critical infrastructure of the nation, the basic, backbone of the nation, like the transportation system, the electricity system, the defense system, the nuclear system, the space system. And when this is controlled by the enemy, then your national security is under threat. When two nations try and defeat each other in the cyber warfare through their cyber army, then it is again a concern in the national security. In the cyber vandalism process, we create physical harm to the cyber infrastructure and the cyber connect, that is the optical fiber lines, the towers, etc. And in cyber intelligence, what we have seen, that the precious information of the nation can be either logged, or people can take that information away from there through hacking and cracking and other things. So all this explain the different kind of cyber crimes. This question can also be expressed in the way of technology, that is not taking it from the perspective of national security. So in paper 4 we have technology segment also, and we are having internal security segment also. So you need to define this answer in both ways. So when it comes to the impact, what we have seen, that this kind of cyber crime are creating concern for the social security, the cultural harmony, or you can say the economic growth, or the strategic security of the nation. So it is harmful for all the aspects of the nation or the nation building, and that is why we need to have the proper strategy to control this cyber crime menace. And to control the cyber crime menace, our efforts and our suggestions can have fivefold. One, the policy and the programs through which we ensure the effective cyber security. These are the 5 pillars of cyber security. Then we have the institutional setup to ensure cyber security. Then we have the legal setup to ensure cyber security. Then we have the technical setup to ensure cyber security. And in the last, we have the international cooperation to ensure the cyber security. So in the main part of your answer, you need to focus upon this. In the policy framework, we have the cyber security policy of 2013 addressing every aspect of cyber security. Then we have National E-Governance Project of 2005, which now known as the Digital India Project, to ensure that our digital security can be strengthened. At institutional level, we have CERT, Computer Emergency and Response Team, through which we are trying to ensure, or we are making sure that we will have a cyber army of our own, like the Israel, China and America is having. Apart from that, we have Botnet Cleaning Center to ensure that the malwares can be controlled. Then we have Critical Infrastructure Protection Center, Botnet Cleaning Center, then Critical Infrastructure Protection Center, and there are various other organizations also. Or we have the departmental setups, departmental cyber security cells, like in the finance ministry, in the defense ministry, in the nuclear department, to ensure the cyber security far as the information is concerned and the physical threat to that setup is concerned. When it comes to legal framework, we have the IT Act 2000, amended at various times, 2008, 2014, 2018, 2019, and the various sections of this act, right? Sections of section 43, section 66, section 67, 72, you can define those sections if you have the place and time. So with this IT Act 2000, we are trying to ensure that not only the definition of cyber crime can be extended, but the punishment can also be ensured. Far as techno efforts are concerned, we are ensuring that the antivirus setup is there, the ethical hackers are there with us, we are having the firewall system with us, we have the password protection system with us, we have the biometric protection system with us. So if you name these 4 or 5 things, then the technological restrictions or the technological aspect of cyber security can be ensured. But the most important aspect in the cyber security in today's time is the international cooperation. In 90s, we have the Budapest Convention, in the beginning of 2000, we have the Budapest Convention to ensure the intergovernmental cooperation with regard to cyber security. And in recent time, we have the Paris Call and the 9 points of Paris Call to ensure that not only the government but the organs of civil society will come forward for the ensurement or to ensure the cyber security. So Paris Call is again very important aspect in the recent time. Apart from that, in the recent problem of data theft, we are having international tech accord with the top companies like Microsoft, Google, etc., Facebook, etc. They decided to have a particular setup that will ensure the data security. far as government of India is concerned, they are having this Shri Krishna committee to ensure personal data protection. So on the recommendation of Shri Krishna committee, we have presented a bill for the personal data protection. Apart from that, we have Viswanathan Commission to control the hate speech or the fake news problems. We have various media regulation setups established to ensure that this technology will not be misused to create trouble within the society. So when we go with all these 4 and 5 aspects of cyber security, then we can easily ensure that the problems created with the cybercrime can be taken care of. So in the recent time when information and communication technology is influencing every aspect of human life, we need to make sure that this technology come along with positive values so that it will become blessing for the human life rather than a curse. So this is your question number 9. Now we'll move ahead with question number 10. So the next question, that is the question number 10, is related to the topic of border management. And the question says that for effective border area management, discuss the steps required to be taken to deny the local support to the militants. Also suggest the ways to manage favorable perception among the locals. So in this question, there are 3 things. The first thing is related to the border area management. And for border area management, there are different ways, but they are focusing upon the way that will deny the local support. And create the positive perception. We need to suggest the measures for this particular purpose. So again, this is 10 marks question with 150 words of limit. And here what you need to answer, that border area management is a broader concept where not only we ensure the physical management, but the psychological management of the borders also. And in the psychological management of the borders, the relation with the neighboring countries and the harnessing the support of the local people or the people living in the border area is the most important thing. Then in the next part you will say that this local support to the militant is ensured. Why and how it can be controlled. So this local support can be seen because of the ethnic boundaries where the similar kind of people are living at both the sides and they are having the blood relation, so they can easily move on from one place to another. The second thing is the economic backwardness that will lead them to the speed money, and they can have money from our hostile neighbors. The third thing is related to deprivation, and there can be the psychological deprivation also. They are not considered to be the part of integral India. In Northeast, these sentiments are very much. Then there is a religious cultural angle also, where what we have seen, that due to religious brainwash, the people of the local areas may work for the militant. We have also seen that the local people cooperate with the militants because of the fear. The government is not ensuring the law and order and justice to them. So because of fear, there are various people who are supporting the militant because of the threat of their life. So due to these 4 or 5 reasons, what we have seen, that militants are gathering the local support from the people, where the most important thing in the recent time is the brainwash or the ideological spread. And this need to be controlled. So if you need to control this local support, then you need to work at 2-3 level. You need to work at the strategic level. You need to work at the developmental level. You need to work at the cultural level. And you need to work at the psychological level also. Far as the strategic level is concerned, we need to ensure the proper boundaries in the border areas. Then the checkposts are there, or you can say this fencing is there, floodlights are there, or we can ensure the concept of a smart fence in the comprehensive integrated border management system. All these things will ensure, along with the technology, that the deployment of the soldiers or the paramilitary forces along with the technology will ensure the strategic security of our boundaries. Once the strategic security is ensured and we are having a proper vigil to the local people, then local people will be under threat to support the local militants. But this fear is not going to work very much. You need to win the hearts of the local people. And for winning the heart of the local people, we need to make sure development of that region. And for that purpose, we have a border area development program from the 7th five-year plan. This border area development program is going to ensure the infrastructural development, both the physical and the social infrastructure in that particular region. So they will have the transportation, they have electricity, communication, schools, hospitals. All these things are going to ensure that this boundary area people will be in favor of the nation. At the third level, we need to ensure the cultural harmony, and in that particular region, we need to respect their culture, their tradition, their religion. And once we will ensure that, and we will make them believe that they are the part of the integral India, then definitely they are not going to support the militants. And fourth and the most important psychological part is concerned, which is expected in this positive perception. We need to win the heart, and to win the heart, we need to work for them 24/7, 365. There is a plan called Civic Action Plan, where our security forces, our paramilitary forces try and help the people of the boundary areas living in the difficult geography, living in the threatful situation, in the disaster management situation. So by helping them during the flood, during the drought, during the snowfall, during the landslide, this will help to win their perception, win their heart. We also need to make sure that if we'll create roads for them, bridges for them, if we'll create a school and hospitals for them, then they will connect with India. We need to do the reverse brainwash process, where we need to show the true faces of militant to the local people, and we need to make them understand that by helping the militants, they are not only dividing the country, but they are not behaving in a patriotic manner. These psychological benefits can be ensured through proper disaster management, through proper employment generation, through proper skill training in these places, and by creating the infrastructural development, we will be able to win the hearts of those people. So all these are the measures through which we can create the positive perception in the people living in the border areas. But this positive perception can be restored and sustained only if we will make sure that trans-border penetration is restricted. Because if trans-border penetration is there, then they are going to harm the integration of the local people with the nation, and they will try and induce them in the different manner with the international sentiments. So it is the high time that rather than going for only strategic and developmental approach, we need to go for the socio-cultural and psychological approach for the process of the border management. And in this way, we will ensure that our border management programs will have the ingredient of winning the heart of the local people, because this is those local people only who have always informed us about the infiltration, whether it is Kargil or any other occasion. So this is how you can explain the question number 10 related to the border management in 2 or 3 aspects, and you will be able to answer this question. So the next question in internal security is the question number 19. And this question number 19 is related to the left-wing extremism, or what we commonly called Naxalism in India. This is a straightforward question which demands the reason and the remedies for the problems of Naxalism. The question goes like that: what are the determinants of left-wing extremism in the eastern part of India? What strategy should the government of India, civil administration, and the security forces should adopt to counter this threat in the affected areas? So as you go for this answer, first you need to understand that they are focusing the eastern part of India from where this problem started and concentrated right now. So you need not to get too much involved with this word eastern part, because Naxalism is mainly confined to eastern and central part of India only. Then they are asking about the reason, that what are the reason that are responsible for this problem of Naxalism, determinant factors. And in the third way, they are asking for the efforts in threefold. First, the government. Second, the civil administration. And the third is the security forces. So when you discuss the problem of left-wing extremism in India, it is related to the communist ideology. And this communist ideology was concentrated in the eastern part of India, especially in Bengal. And that is why this menace started from the Naxalbari and gradually spreaded in the neighboring states of Bihar, Odisha, and then in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc. Gradually, they created a red corridor in the central eastern part of India, and it starts from the Tirupati in the Andhra Pradesh to the Pashupati in the Nepal. So from Tirupati to Pashupati, we are having a red corridor where we are having the slogan of Lal Salam dominating the idea of Sarvahara Ganatantra, that is People's Republic, and they are demanding that they need to have the socialist or the communist ruling in the nation. And that is why they are called the left-wing extremism or the Maoism in India. So out of the explanation I have made, you can explain the red corridor in the beginning to suggest that it is concentrated to the eastern part of India. But in the second part, you will say that now Naxalism is no longer confined to the eastern part. They are having their presence in the central part in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh's tribal dominated areas. Then they will have their presence in the Maharashtra, or you can say the eastern part of Maharashtra, Rajasthan also. They have created a golden triangle in the tribal dominated areas of Gujarat, Rajasthan, and this Madhya Pradesh also. Even in the southern states of neighboring Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, or some parts of Karnataka, we see the presence of Naxalism with the support of Litte terrorists also. So now Naxalism is no longer confined to the eastern part of India. If we go for the reason of Naxalism, then the most important thing is the geographical factor or the demographic factor. We call it triple junction theory. And in triple junction theory, if we have a state with interconnected and interstate borders, a difficult geography with hills, rivers, etc., and the tribal dominated population which can be brainwashed easily, then that place can become the harbor for Naxalism. And that is why in the beginning it was there in Bengal, Odisha, Bihar, tri-junction, triple junction. Then we'll have the area shifted to Karimnagar in Andhra Pradesh with PWG, and in this Karimnagar is adjacent to the borders of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra. And later on, this Bastar or Jagdalpur region is again surrounded by various states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Odisha. So there we have the triple junction theory, where the difficult geography, the simple demography, that is the tribal people, and interstate border help in harboring the Naxalism. Apart from that, the tribal exploitation is one of the major reasons for Naxalism in India. With the forest laws and other processes of industrialization, urbanization, we have created threat to their Jal Jangal Jameen, and that is why they are fighting for their rights. The migration of tribes, their penetration in their secluded life, the control of the outer people in the tribal areas, making them landless laborers, the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, the arms trafficking, forcing the tribe people for this Naxalism, all these are the reason what we can suggest are important for this Naxalism. The third thing is the administrative vacuum, what we have seen, that in the Naxal dominated areas, the presence of governmental setup and governmental officers is negligible. Moving ahead, we have a political failure because till now we didn't decide that whether they are our people or anti-national people. So we are not confirmed that whether we should fight with them with Boli or Goli, whether we have the defense strategy or the developmental strategy for them. Then there is local political support to them. Then there is local support of the local people to the Naxalites. There is ideological support coming from various universities, colleges, which we term as the urban Naxals. There are various NGOs and the parts of civil societies which are funding this idea of Naxalism. They are having international and national nexus. They are having nexus to the Maoist terror outfits of Northeast, whether it is Bodo, National Democratic Front of Bodoland or National Socialist Council of Nagaland. Or they are having connections with the Maoist in Nepal or ISI or the Lette itself. And all those are the reason for the Naxalism in India. So to control this Naxalism, the reasons are too many, and I think in 150 word, or rather this is the question for 250 word, no? So 250 word, these reasons will be too much to explain. In almost 150 word, we need to focus upon the strategy of the government to control the Naxalism. And when we go for the strategy of the government, then our government in 2017 decided to define a principle called Samadhan to control the Naxalism. This Samadhan include various defense strategies and developmental strategies to control Naxalism. So even if you explain Samadhan, it will claim almost 100+ words. And apart from Samadhan, if you go for defense and developmental strategies, then there can be many ways to suggest the remedies to control left-wing extremism. In Samadhan, S stands for smart leadership, and this smart leadership needed at all the level, at the governmental level, at the civil administration level, and at the security forces level. And this smart leadership should have proper connectivity and coordination with each other. A is related to this aggressive strategy. And aggressive strategy suggests that the government now realized that they are the anti-national people and we cannot go soft towards them. So those Naxalis, who are Naxalis from their ideology, from their core, they are rich, they are educated, and they cannot be changed through any method. So there should be aggressive strategy to fight them. That is, we need to have the special forces like the Cobra battalion for the guerrilla war, the Bastaria battalion to fight the women Naxalis, or we can have the Greyhound forces where the interstate cooperation can be ensured. We can have the various operations like Operation Green Hunt or the Operation Prahar that we are having right now. After aggressive strategy, we have motivation and training. And this motivation and training is required at two levels, at the armed forces level or the military forces level, so that they will keep their energy intact to fight the Naxals in the remote areas. And at the level of local people also, so that we can control their support, the Naxalite support over there. After motivation and training, there is another A, that is actionable intelligence. And actionable intelligence means that intelligence prior to the incident, the intelligence at time. The intelligence agency and the controlling agency or the military forces should have coordination with each other. So this actionable intelligence will help us to control the Naxal incident as well as capturing the Naxals also. After that, we have D, that is dashboard based system, where we have KPIs, key performance indicators. In simple words, dashboard based strategy means that we will have a proper record of the Naxalite incident and the efforts made to control the Naxals. So like in police stations or in the military centers, we'll have a dashboard based performance system. Then H is harnessing technology, that is using technology to control Naxals. We can use the underground sensors, the thermal imagers, the bulletproof jackets, the laser barriers, that in the movie of Newton we have seen that we need to have night vision sensors with them to fight with them at the night time. Apart from this harnessing technology can be satellite technology for the purpose of intelligence. There's the technology of drone to see the Naxalite areas. Then A is action plan for each theater. And action plan for each theater means that we cannot go with a common approach for fighting the Naxals. In different areas, Naxals have different reasons and different strategies of working. So according to that, we need to make our roadmap to fight the Naxals. And lastly, N is no to funds. And as our Prime Minister said, that through demonetization and other cashless economy procedure, we are going to control the problem of Naxalism and terrorism. So if we can control this blood stream of Naxalism, that is the funds coming through international and national sources, then not only the ideology, but the organizations of Naxals can be controlled. So this is what we say the Samadhan strategy for controlling the Naxal, and this can be the ideal strategy having both defense and developmental aspects. Apart from that, if you go for defense, then you can have the more deployment of paramilitary forces. You can have the more trained forces like combat forces, or you can say Cobra Battalion, etc. You can have more operations against the Naxals. You can have zero tolerance policy against the Naxals. You can use more and more technology to penetrate into the areas of Naxal. So these are the defense strategies that we can talk about. Far as the developmental strategy is concerned, we need to restore their forest rights like we did through Act of 2006, Forest Dweller Act. Apart from that, the forest laws should be make little bit liberal for the tribal people. Their land rights should be reinsured. Their forest rights should be reinsured. The industrialization process, the urbanization process should be there with their consensus rather than forced. We also need to make sure that we'll have the proper skill development, employment generation in the Naxal areas, like with the Roshni scheme we are trying to gather the cadre of Naxal people or Naxal youth. We also need to make sure infrastructural development in their areas, schools, hospitals, etc. that will ensure the development. And we should work for the proper human resource development with their consensus if we want to ensure the control over the Naxal problem. At the end, what you can suggest that there can be n number of remedies to fight this problem of Naxals, but we need to make sure that we can identify between the Majboot Naxal and the Majboor Naxal. That is the powerful Naxals and the brainwashed Naxals. The powerful Naxals, ideological Naxals, should be dealt with the zero tolerance policy, and we should have the policy of Goli rather than Boli. But far as the brainwashed Naxal are concerned, who are Naxal because of speed money, because of pressure, because of life threat, they deserve a chance that they will surrender in front of the government. And in the surrender policy, we should have the proper security and the employment facilities for them. And this, surrender policy will ensure that these Majboor Naxali can become the part of the mainstream India. So this is how you can bifurcate between the different type of Naxals and can derive a strategy in the future. The next question, that is the question number 20, is related to two topics of internal security. One is border management and second one is the security forces. The question says that analyze the internal security threats and the trans-border crimes along the Myanmar, Bangladesh and Pakistan borders, including the line of control. Also discuss the role played by various security forces in this regard. So this question will have threefold. This is 250 words question containing 15 marks. So in the beginning, you need to explain the various internal security threats that we have seen in the border areas. Then you need to make it specific in relation to Pakistan, in relation to Bangladesh, and in relation to Myanmar. That what are the specific threats that we have seen in these areas, and what are the reasons behind this. And then one by one you need to explain the efforts made by the security forces, that which security force is involved with which nation, and what are their strategies to control the borders in that particular region. In the beginning, you can say that the internal security threats of India are having external outputs also. And that is why what we have seen, that the various internal security threats are coming from outside India also. India having the fragile boundaries, the disputed boundaries, the porous boundaries, the overlapped boundaries, and the hostile neighbors will ensure that the internal security threats will be in manifold. The threats are in the form of terrorism, extremism, separatism, communalism, racism, Naxalism, or it is in the form of various kinds of trafficking like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, organ trafficking, wildlife trafficking. Or these threats are in the form of various organized crimes like the education mafia, the mining mafia, the forest mafia. There is foreign induced currency notes for the economic threat of the nation. There is pornographic spread or the various kind of cyber crime to create the cyber threat or cyber terror in the nation. So the different type of internal security threats in India are in multidimensional manner. With regard to specific boundaries, we have some specific kind of security threats because of certain reason. Far as Pakistan is concerned, our second or rather third largest boundary goes with Pakistan, and it is around 3323 kilometers, comprising Jammu, Kashmir, Punjab, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. There we see the problem of cross-border terrorism through LOC. Islamic terror is spreaded in the region of Kashmir. Then we have drug and arms trafficking and human trafficking in various ways. Illegal immigrants and illegal and terrorists coming to through the fragile boundaries. What we have also seen here, that we are having the problem of local support to the terrorist or the militants. And to control this particular thing, we need to make sure that we will have both strategic as well as the developmental strategy to fight with the problems in the Pakistan border. In this regard, we have decided to make Pakistan a part of border area development program, where we'll ensure the infrastructure in the backward areas. Then we have the idea of integrated checkpost, and now we are having various checkposts with the developmental setup. And to control this, we have the formation of Land Port Authority of India. Thirdly, we will ensure the smart fence in the Pakistan border, and that is the most important point. Here we are going to ensure the electronic surveillance through CIBMS, Comprehensive Integrated Border Management System. In this comprehensive integrated border management system, we will have 24/7 365 electronic surveillance to the Indo-Pak border. In 2018, we have decided that in the Jammu Kashmir region, where along with LOC, we are having the problem of cross-border terrorism, we will create a smart fence under CIBMS in the pattern of Israel-Palestine. With this smart fence, we will have the CCTV cameras, night vision equipments, thermal imagers, underground sensors, laser barriers, drones deployed to these places, and this will ensure that the vigilance is humanless. There will be no loss of security forces. The tension of border security will be reduced, and border security will be more strengthened. So this smart fence idea is the most fancy idea with regard to Pakistan. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, in Bangladesh, we are having the most important problem of illegal immigrants coming through these borders. And the reason is the border with Bangladesh is indented. That is, Indian and Bangladesh areas are inserted into each other. Apart from that, we are having the problem of cow trafficking through various rivers. We are having problem of northeast terrorist taking harbor in the Bangladesh. We are having the problem of Rohingya refugees. We are also having the problem of Islamic terror coming from there. And when we have hostile government in Bangladesh, that is rather than this Hasina, when we have Khalida Jia in the crown, then the hostile relationship is also always going to create trouble. We also have the river water disputes with Bangladesh creating trouble in the border management. To resolve all this, we have worked on multiple fronts. Far as border area development is concerned, we are having the infrastructural development program along with the boundary of Bangladesh. Apart from that, in Bangladesh boundary, we have created border security grid. This border security grid creates both physical and non-physical barriers through electronic and human surveillance both. The intelligence agency, the state police, the paramilitary forces, the security forces, all are integrated in this border security grid. The process of fencing the borders or unmarked border is also going along with the Jawans of Bangladesh Rifles through the northeast boundary to control the illegal immigrants. And the recent effort of NRC in Assam is also going to help in controlling the illegal immigrants to that particular place and the terrorists coming from cross-border region. Apart from that, the most important effort is the Indo-Bangladesh Border Agreement drafted or created in 2015 with 100th Amendment, where the indented Indian and Bangladesh areas are given to each other through an agreement. So this is very important in regard to streamlining the boundary or controlling the boundary. You must remember that Pakistan borders since the beginning is controlled through border security forces, and after the creation of Bangladesh, BSF is deputed in the Bangladesh border itself. So both Pakistan and Bangladesh are secured through the help of border security forces. Okay. Far as Myanmar is concerned, then in Myanmar we are having the problem of Maoist terror, the problem of various terrorist outfits, the problem of Rohingyas, the problem of drug trafficking, the problem of arms trafficking through the Golden Triangle. And because of all these reasons, the security of Myanmar boundary is essential for the security of Northeast. And as we know that there is a Chinese threat to the Northeast region, and it is coming from both the sides through encircling India policy. On one hand, it is targeting the chicken neck through Doklam and other places. On the other hand, by helping the Burma or creating the puppet government in Burma, they are trying to capture northeastern areas from the other side also. So the encounter of Chinese encircling India policy is also important in the Myanmar boundary. This Myanmar boundary, which is defined through Arakan Yoma and comprises Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram, is difficult geographical boundaries through various rivers, hills, forests, etc. So to control this boundary, the duty is given to Assam Rifles. And Assam Rifles, with their 46 battalions, are patrolling this boundary. Although out of these 46, 15 are deployed for the border security and 30 is combating with terror activities in the Northeast. You need to understand that this Assam Rifle people are helping the local people through civic action plan by helping them in disaster situation, helping them through skill development, helping them through infrastructural development, through border area development program, etc. And if with this, in this manner, if they ensure the winning of heart of the local people, then the security of Myanmar boundary will be very easy. Because what we have seen that with Myanmar boundary, we have the similar ethnic identity people living at the both sides. So it becomes very much easy to come here and there, especially for the purpose of drug trafficking and arms trafficking. Moreh and Jokha water are the two dominant areas of drug trafficking or smuggling in the area of Mizoram. And there we need to make sure that these areas are patrolled or vigiled by the security forces in the proper manner. So in this way, one by one you can define that how Pakistan border, Bangladesh border and Myanmar border are taken care by our security forces. But we need to make sure that if we want to have real border area management, then apart from technology, we need to make sure that our relation with the neighboring nation become important. So through diplomacy, the problem of border management or the broader problems can be taken care of. Not only the developmental and the strategic aspect will work. This you need to show in the end that it is the high time that the government of India go forward with this look east policy to act east policy. They will make sure rapid development in the northeastern areas, infrastructural development in the northeastern area that we have seen in the policies of current government also. So this is how you can explain this fourth question of internal security. So in today's explanation, we dealt with almost 6 questions related to governance and internal security both. If you were the part of our Awake program that is designed for the mains appearing people of this year, you must realize that almost 80 to 90% of the questions are directly coming from what we have discussed in the classroom in the 30 days and the notes that we have provided to the people of both Hindi medium as well as the English medium. So this exam is all about the prediction of the question. And if you can predict the question in a correct manner with associating it with current, then there can't be any question that you cannot answer in an easy manner. Although the questions of this year I find comparatively easier and less associated to the current scenario, but in future the trend will not remain the same. So you must prepare with keeping this in mind, that the preparation for any subject, including the subject of governance as well as the internal security, goes with the current scenario. The incident of current associated with the topic of the past or traditional topics will form the question in UPSC in general sense. You must also remember that the topics related to governance and internal security become important because they can help you in the topics of essay, if not in UPSC, but in state services also. I hope that this explanation of ours will help the people who have appeared in mains to analyze their answers, and it will help the people or other students in a manner that how the correct answer writing can be made. I can understand that while explaining the answers, we surpass the limit of 150 words and 250 words because we are explaining it in multiple dimensions. But even if you choose 2 or 3 dimensions from the dimensions that we have suggested here, then also your answer will be adequate enough to fetch the good marks or the qualifying marks for you. So always remember that while formatting the answers, the different dimensions or the multidimensional approach is very important. You need to format the answer, then you need to present the answer in a lucid manner also, and all this thing needs to be done in a proper time framework. So this reading of question, formatting of answer, and defining the segments, all this work must be done within 1 minute, and rest of the time must be used for writing the answer with proper writing and proper flow. So this is how you can go with better answer writing. There are multiple videos available with regard to answer writing also, so you can take help from there also. From my perspective, I explained the questions of governance and internal security, and rest of the questions will be explained to you with our by our fellow teachers. So thank you very much for today, and we'll meet in future with new topics.